Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I am Anna Lorenzini, and this is my colleague, Devine. We are part of the ITSS Verona member series on the Middle East. Today, we are going to interview a Syrian man who will share his experience with us. He has recently returned to Syria after 12 years. The last time he was in Syria was before the war. For security reasons, the interview has already been done. In fact, today there will be a voice actor who will read the answers on his behalf. Without further ado, let's start our interview.
Very much for taking the time to join us. You had just returned from Syria, your first visit since 2010. How has the country changed in those 12 years?
Unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to return to my country for several years. At first for my work, then because of the war. Moreover, at the same time, there was the risk that they would call you back to arms, even if you have already done military service. Besides, you never know if your name might be on some list. Changed is to say little. A country, a population consumed by war. I felt foreign in my own country. I'm referring above all to Damascus, but it is what can be perceived throughout Syria. Life has changed a lot. There is so much fear, and now they told me it is better than before. Until recently, after sunset, you didn't see anyone on the street. Before the war, for example, the shops remained open until late, and the city remained alive even after their closure. There are checkpoints now, and life is more expensive. Human concentration has occurred in the cities as a result of the war. The problem is that there are not enough opportunities for everyone. There is so much delinquency, crime, poverty, corruption. You can see unhappiness in people's eyes. The quality of life got worse. Before you found tourists, researchers, the culture was alive. Syria was a center of culture and a meeting place for different cultures that coexisted. First, in Syria, there were three social classes: the wealthiest class, a poorer class, and then the middle class, which was the majority. Today there are two, one very rich and one very poor, which is the majority. There are many people who have made a lot of money because of the war.
You have seen many changes compared to 12 years ago. People, places. Some time ago you said, quote, those who accept survive. So my question is, from a more practical point of view, how much have people's everyday lives changed? And could you give us some examples?
Okay, first of all, I would start by saying that for Syrians today, it is a life in a queue. People are always in line, whether for food, gas, or gasoline. They are always in line, even for 6 to 7 hours. It has been introduced for a while, the Bitaka Dakia. It was sponsored by Asma, the president's wife, who became a businesswoman, who also managed to gain control of most of Assad's former cousin, Rahim Makhlouf's economy. He, in addition to holding almost 80% of the Syrian economy and owner of one of the largest Syrian telephone companies, Syriatel, was so powerful that no foreign company at the time could do business in Syria without his consent. At the same point, when the family felt he was too powerful, they took everything from him. And who took over? The president's wife, Asma. The difference is that once she got hold of everything, she tried to be smarter, claiming that she had done it to help people, but that's not true. Going back to Bitaka Dakia, since most people have difficulty accessing basic necessities such as food, and the government has created a network that distributes food to citizens at controlled prices decided by the government. To access this so-called service, you need to own this famous Pitaka Dakia. The idea was try to lend a hand to the people, since prices on the market are rising so fast. Each person has to register to get it, and the government decides how much to give to the person and decides the day they can go and collect their portion through a message that comes to you on an app, usually one time a month. To give an example, 1 kilo of bread, if you go to buy with paper, costs you 250 Syrian liras, more or less. That even for those who live in Syria is not so much. Otherwise, you buy it from regular shops at the floating price of the market. That while I was there, it reached to 2,500 Syrian liras. But often we talk about big families for who 1 kilo of bread per month is nothing. Even getting this card is not so immediate. While as I was done, I tried to do it myself. It took me 3 days. The first day I was there for early morning to afternoon. Finally, after holding line and after paying the guard to let me through, it was my turn. But then the power went out and the clerk couldn't do anything. And I had to come back 2 days later and wait again. The cost of living is extraordinary and the work is very little. Working hours do not correspond to salary. Let me give an example. The salary of an average employee is 80,000 Syrian liras, which is equivalent to 20 euros. It is very little, especially if compared, for example, to the fact that one bottle of oil costs about 16,000 lira. That is equivalent to 4 euros. How does a family? Okay, another example of pricing growing over a very short period of time. When I arrived in Syria, I remember that the shop near my house, where it sells a bit of everything, sold half a kilo of cheese to 6,000 Syrian pounds, which corresponds to 1.50 euros. When I went away after a little less than 1 month, it had reached 9,500 Syrian pounds. Imagine yourself for those who live there, with a salary of 20 euros per month, and a dependently family. Potatoes also from 1,000 lira per kilo, increased to 3,000 lira over a period of 3 weeks. A tray of sweets has reached 40,000 lira. For example, my mother takes a pension of 35,000 liras. How can she do it? Another factor which makes the situation even more dramatic is the lack of electricity. Today, people live with the energy that the government provides, but at intervals of time, realize that electricity comes for 3 to 4 hours, more or less, a day, and it's not consecutive. In fact, many people have tried to get batteries to try to produce energy. Only those also cost a lot. Damascus lives thanks to the battery. They found this solution. The lack of power has always been a problem in Syria. Before the war, it happened that it could jump 1 hour a day. With the war and with the territories that were taken by Daesh, Syria lost even more. The government does not think of improving the situation, but tries to adjust. For example, in suburbs of Damascus, they also thought about this. An entrepreneur buys a generator and places it in a neighborhood. Well, once that's done, it started producing electricity and then it sells back to single host per kilowatt at very high prices. What happens? That's very often even the families that initially bought it began to decrease the kilowatt because they could not afford it. It was too expensive. But at the same time, if you know someone, you can pay under the table for one of these people who resell electricity. And so when, for example, you get disconnected from your power source. He connects you to the power distribution in another neighborhood. But only if you bribe someone with power, if you have food in the fridge, for example, it will go wrong the next day because of the lack of electricity. But also think about the shocks. All those activities or jobs that need power, they can work. There were also people who during the winter, because of the lack of heating, died from the cold. For example, in Aleppo, they found a decreased mother next to her two children because to try to keep her children warm, she had taken everything off. The supply of gasoline, another disaster. Always work with the cart I was talking about before. Until a few years ago, people found themselves waiting hours and hours in a row to get some gas. There were those who even left the car in line for 24 hours walking home to eat or wash themselves. Now with the Bitaka, Dakia, the situation has improved, but not so much. You have 20 liters per week at a discounted price, unlike food. For example, you can't buy gas without paper. If person lives far away or needs a lot of gasoline for work, how does he do if he runs out of his 20 liters of gasoline? He's without a car. My cousin, for example, who lives further away, hardly ever goes to visit his family because between the little gas available and checkpoints along the way, everything costs too much. If you want gasoline outside of your 20 liters, you can get it only if you know some gas station, which can sell you a few more liters on the counter. Let us not talk about health, even though, for example, following the pandemic, there is not assistance. Nothing is being done about it either. People at the same point also stopped reporting or asking for assistance because the military often came and took you away to places that not even your family knew.
ISIS, also known as Daesh, have been declared defeated. Is this actually the case on the ground?
I had no direct experiences, being that it was concentrated more to north of Syria. Again, the defeat of ISIS was used as a means for President Assad to show the people that he is doing something for them, but it is not true. Currently, Daesh is less in Erbil. Where are the Kurds? Let's say that today maybe you can no longer define it as ISIS, but more as groups of armed people, dormant cells. They exist today as a doctrine. You no longer hear about ISIS as we know it, but as armed groups. For example, a friend of mine who works for the original government, he risks in the street because it is full of armed groups. But he also told me that to this day, we no longer talk about ISIS as a single bloc, but more of separate groups. In general, when you leave Damascus, the situation is more dangerous.
Always from a safety point of view, how much change has changed? I mean, in addition to Daesh, what are the dangers a person in the street may face?
In general, it is risky to go out. In the evening, it is not recommended. If you walk, for example, in the evening, you do not even have street lights. Outside Damascus is worse. The situation of control of the different areas and continuous instability. As I said before, there are many armed groups. There could be people who were affiliated with ISIS, but also independent criminals. People who carry out personal vendettas or even criminal organization which have proliferated in recent years. For example, especially in the early years of the war, there were people who wanted to escape from Syria, but did not have the means to do so. From desperation, there were those who had come to sell, for example, a kidney to get some money to go away, to try to secure a better future for their family. Kidnappings have also increased in exchange for ransom. If the family has the opportunity to pay, well. Otherwise, in some cases, kidnapped people can also become victims of organ trafficking. The situation has also changed within cities. For example, I remember that once the children would go around and play on the street alone. Now no one trusts for women and children. The situation is certainly even more delicate. There is also the fairly significant presence of Iranians in the country, which also involves attacks by Israelis that often take place outside of Damascus.
When the West first intervened in Syria, one of their stated goals was to remove the Assad regime from power. It committed horrendous acts of brutality against its own people, including the use of chemical weapons. But the West has dropped their stated goal of removing the Assad regime. Do you believe now there is any chance the Assad regime will be removed?
To this day, I think it's impossible because man learns from experience and Assad has learned the lesson. He has understood how to defend himself in general. To this day, the people do not have the opportunity to go to the streets and defend themselves or fight. To date, the main war of people is the war on hunger. Survival Syria has become a prison. Imagine that the president is the holder of everything. The jailer and the people are the prisoners. The jailer gives a piece of bread every now and then to keep his prisoners alive, but if he stops giving bread, they die. Today, the first concern has become survival. People do not go out. They are cut off from the rest of the world. People have gone so far as to accept what is given to them by their masters in order to survive. They know that Assad is not going away right now. They are hoping that something will change. Of course, they do not hope so much that he leaves, as that the situation changes, whether it is him or without him. In few words, they want to leave. Here is how far their despair has gone. They want their dignity back. There are so many basic things of everyday life that don't work anymore. That almost doesn't matter how to get out of it, as much as the fact that it just gets better. He's now trying to improve his figure on the outside too. Now, for example, he has tried to reopen the dialogue with the UAE. Maybe he's afraid. I personally hope so. I hope can leave as soon as possible, also because he's cause of so much suffering. But he will not go away. He understood that with violence he can gain control. Just see how many people have just appeared in recent years. All the violent repression imposed in the last 10 years. You just have to see its allies, Iran, Russia, and China. I hope it will change, that he will leave. But without help, I see a very remote possibility.
Okay, thank you very much for taking the time to share your experiences with us.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like to thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you too.